The air in the Oakhaven West Division lobby is thick and heavy, a cocktail of stale odors that tells a story of neglect. There's the acrid scent of coffee left burning in the pot for hours, the musty smell of damp, forgotten paperwork stacked in corners, and the faint, chemical tang of a cheap disinfectant that tries, and fails, to mask the underlying lack of hygiene. It's the kind of air that feels heavy in your lungs, the kind of place where hope comes to die under the depressing hum of flickering fluorescent lights. On the grimy, beige linoleum floor, a dark puddle is beginning to spread, a stark stain against the dullness. The cold water hits her without warning. It's not a splash. It's a deluge, an icy, deliberate cascade that feels like a physical blow. The water crashes over the brim of her worn Texas Longhorns baseball cap, instantly soaking the cheap fabric and the hair tucked beneath. It streams down her forehead, into her eyes, down her cheeks and neck, a cold violation that travels under the collar of her plain gray t-shirt, soaking a large swath of it to her skin. Droplets splatter around her, marking the floor with dark, wet streaks. For a long, suspended moment, she just stands there, her entire body locked rigid with a combination of pure shock and a sudden, searing humiliation that burns hotter than any anger. She doesn't scream. She doesn't curse. The only sound she makes is a sharp, choked gasp, a sound caught in her chest, a mixture of utter disbelief and rage so profound it has no words. The water continues its journey, dripping from the ends of her hair, from her chin, from the hem of her shirt, a steady, rhythmic plink, plink, plink onto the floor, forming a small, pathetic puddle around her scuffed-up Ariat boots. The sound is unnaturally loud in the dead silence that has fallen over the lobby. "I told you, T.O., get out!" A man's voice bellows, the sound raw and full of contempt, tearing through the quiet room. The voice belongs to Officer Dale Cobb. He stands behind the tall, imposing oak counter, a fortress of wood and bulletproof glass meant to separate the public from the police. He's a stocky man in his late 40s, his face flushed a blotchy, angry red, his narrow eyes glaring. In his fist, he's still clutching the now empty 1-liter plastic water bottle, his knuckles white. He looks at the soaking woman not with regret, but with a cruel, twisted glee, the look of a man who feels he has just carried out a righteous act of punishment. "This is the Oakhaven Police Department," he sneers, his voice dripping with disdain. "Not some charity case for every piece of trouble that blows in. Now get out of here before I really lose my temper." The incident happened so fast, so shockingly, that the few other people scattered on the hard blue plastic chairs along the wall are frozen, their eyes wide, their mouths slightly agape. A young mother instinctively pulls her child closer. An elderly man in a worn-out work shirt just stares, unable to process what he's just seen a uniformed officer do. In a far corner, a young rookie officer, who had been meticulously arranging files, has looked up. His face is pale, a canvas of obvious embarrassment and confusion. He knows this is wrong, deeply wrong, but he is young, low on the totem pole, and intimidated. He remains frozen, a silent accomplice to the degradation, showing no sign of intervening. The woman, the target of all this venom, begins to move. Slowly, very slowly, she raises a hand, brushing away the wet strands of hair that cling to her face. Then, very deliberately, she raises her head. The water is still running down her cheeks and chin, but her eyes, now fully visible from under the brim of her cap, are different. They are not the eyes of a victim. They are not filled with tears or fear. They are cold. They are razor-sharp. They are intensely, unervingly focused. They are fixed on Officer Dale Cobb, piercing through his aggressive posture, and they seem to be doing something more than just looking. They are assessing, analyzing, and committing every single detail to memory. "My kind?" She repeats a slur he had used just moments before, her voice surprisingly deep and clear, without a single trace of a tremor. Each word rings out with a chilling firmness, cutting over the sound of water still dripping onto the floor. "Officer, what exactly did you mean by my kind? This is a place that is supposed to represent law and protection, a sanctuary for the citizens it serves. But what just transpired was an act of pure, unadulterated prejudice, a blatant abuse of power committed in public. Why did this police officer feel so secure, so entitled, that he could commit such a cruel and irrational act? What had this woman, in her unassuming civilian clothes, done to deserve this public humiliation? Will this moment, this blatant display of misconduct, be covered up like so many others? Or will there finally be consequences? And more importantly, who is this mysterious woman who stands soaked and humiliated, yet radiates an aura of unbreakable strength from behind that determined gaze? We are about to find out. And for Officer Dale Cobb, the world as he knows it is about to come to a complete and catastrophic end. The truth will be a nightmare from which he can never wake up. Well, howdy, folks. If you'll had a good time watching this, do us a kindness and hit that like button. We'd love to hear from you in the comments, so don't be a stranger. And if you want to see more, go on and subscribe. Y'all come on back now here. Just 1 week earlier, the atmosphere in the mayor's office in Oak Haven City Hall was one of cautious optimism. Anya Sharma, at the age of 38, was officially sworn in as the new chief of police. Standing there, taking her oath, she was a striking figure. It wasn't just her fit, athletic build the result of years spent on patrol before climbing the ranks, but the fierce intelligence in her eyes. She carried herself with a quiet, confident authority that left no doubt she was in command. She was an outsider, a decorated officer brought in from the sprawling, complex Houston Police Department, where she had earned a legendary reputation for transforming a notoriously corrupt narcotics unit into a model of accountability. The city council and the mayor of Oak Haven, facing a crisis of public trust, had pinned all their hopes on her. Oak Haven, Texas, was a city at war with itself. On one side, you had the explosive growth gleaming glass towers for new tech companies, trendy restaurants, and sprawling suburbs full of young families from all over the country. On the other, you had the old Oak Haven, the established sun-bleached neighborhoods, and the old guard mentality that came with them. This rapid change created a deep friction, and nowhere was that friction more apparent than in the relationship between the community and its police force. In recent years, the Oak Haven Police Department had been plagued by a series of high-profile incidents. There were lawsuits alleging excessive force, a constant stream of complaints about racial profiling during traffic stops, and a pervasive feeling, especially within Oak Haven's growing Black and Latino communities, that the police were an occupying force, not a protective one. The trust had been completely eroded. Chief Sharma's mandate was clear and monumental. Rebuild that trust, implement sweeping reforms, and drag the Oak Haven PD into the 21st century, whether it wanted to go or not. Anya Sharma was a hands-on leader. She believed that to truly understand the rot within a department's culture, you couldn't rely on thick, sanitized reports, statistical charts, or formal meetings with subordinate commanders in her comfortable, air-conditioned office. The truth, she knew from hard-won experience, was far messier and was found on the streets, in the precinct lobbies, in the real-time interactions between her officers and the public they were sworn to serve. This philosophy was born from a searing memory early in her own career. As a fresh-faced rookie in Houston, her field training officer had been a cynical veteran who taught her the unwritten rules. How to write a report to protect yourself and the department, not to reflect the truth. How to size people up based on their car, their clothes, their neighborhood. One night, she witnessed him roughly handle a young Hispanic man for contempt of cop after a minor traffic stop. An incident that was later written up as the man being combative and aggressive. Anya had remained silent, intimidated and new to the job, and the guilt of that silence had haunted her for years. It became her driving force. She vowed that when she was in a position of power, she would never again allow the truth to be buried. She would find it, no matter how ugly it was, and she would drag it into the light. The true face of an organization, she often said, is revealed not by the people at the top, but by those on the very front lines. So, in her first weeks in Oak Haven, while she conducted the official meetings with community leaders and politicians, she was also secretly planning something else. A series of unannounced, undercover visits to various police stations across the city, especially those in districts with the most citizen complaints. And for these visits to be truly effective, she knew she had to disappear. She had to become an ordinary civilian, a face in the crowd. That Tuesday morning, she stood in front of her closet at home, ignoring the crisp, perfectly pressed uniforms and the sharp, tailored power suits. She was building a character. She chose a pair of blue jeans that were faded and worn at the knees, a plain gray t-shirt with no logos, and a pair of scuffed-up Ariat boots that looked like they'd seen their fair share of dusty Texas roads. The final piece of the costume was a well-worn Texas Longhorns baseball cap she'd had for years. She pulled her thick black hair back into a tight bun and tucked it completely under the cap, pulling the brim down low to shadow her eyes. She wore no makeup, no watch, no jewelry. She even practiced slumping her shoulders slightly, trying to look a little tired, a little world-weary, like an ordinary working woman dealing with the everyday hassles of life. She was creating Lauren, a plainly dressed woman of color who didn't look important, powerful, or connected. She wanted to see how her department would treat Maya Jones, how they would treat someone they thought had no voice. First on her carefully curated list was the Western Regional Police Station. The West Division served a large, diverse area that included both stable, middle-class neighborhoods and more economically disadvantaged areas with high rates of street crime. It had also received the most public complaints about police service over the past 2 years. In a careful, private review of personnel files and internal complaint reports, many of which were conveniently closed with findings of insufficient evidence or unfounded, one name had repeatedly surfaced. It was linked to allegations of rudeness, impatience, inappropriate language, and discriminatory remarks, particularly directed at women, immigrants, and people of color. Officer Dale Cobb, badge number 714. Cobb had been at the West Division for nearly a decade, spending most of his time on desk duty because an old knee injury from his glory days as a high school football quarterback had made him unfit for street patrol. The injury had ended his dreams, and in many ways it seemed to have ended his ambition and his empathy as well. He was stuck. Notes from his former supervisors described him as gruff and difficult, but ultimately concluded he gets the job done. The complaints against him were consistently attributed to misunderstandings or his outspoken personality. Anya Sharma saw through the bureaucratic jargon. She sensed that Officer Cobb was a prime example of the deep-seated cultural rot she needed to address at its root. He wasn't just a bad apple. He was a sign that the barrel itself was spoiled. She decided that Officer Cobb would be her first test case. To avoid being recognized, she didn't take the shiny, black chauffeur-driven official SUV that came with her position. Instead, she borrowed a slightly beat-up, 10-year-old Ford F-150 from a close friend, the kind of truck you see everywhere in Texas. She drove to the area near the West Division, carefully parking on a residential street a few blocks away, blending in with the older cars owned by local residents. She checked her reflection one last time in the rearview mirror, took a deep, steadying breath, and reminded herself of the purpose of this mission. She then stepped out of the truck, joining the stream of pedestrians on the sidewalk, just another face in the crowd. She was no longer Chief Sharma. She was Lauren, and she was about to walk into the lion's den. The story she had prepared was plausible, mundane, and the perfect test of an officer's professionalism. She would say that she was Lauren, living in a nearby apartment complex, and she wanted information about the procedure for obtaining a temporary restraining order against an upstairs neighbor. The neighbor, she would explain, was consistently making excessive noise late at night and had recently started making verbal threats when she complained. It was a common problem in densely populated areas, serious enough to warrant police attention but not an urgent, life-threatening emergency. It was the kind of situation that required patience, guidance, and a professional service attitude from the officer at the front desk. It would be the perfect litmus test for Officer Dale Cobb. When Anya Sharma, now fully embodying the persona of Lauren, pushed open the heavy glass doors to the main lobby of the West Division Police Station, her first impression was one of tired, institutional neglect. The pale yellow paint on the walls was peeling in corners. The beige linoleum floor had a few small cracks spiderwebbing out from the baseboards. The community notice posters tacked to a bulletin board looked worn and outdated. Some of them curled at the edges and faded by the sun. The light from the long fluorescent tubes on the ceiling was dim and yellowish, casting a gloomy, almost sickly pallor over the entire space. It felt less like a public service center and more like a place people were forced to go, a bureaucratic purgatory. Only a few other residents sat scattered on the rows of stiff, uncomfortable plastic chairs, their faces etched with a mixture of boredom and impatience. The reception desk itself was the only thing in the lobby that seemed to have retained its original solidity. It was made of dark oak, tall and imposing, designed to create a sense of authority and distance. Behind this wooden fortress, under a thick panel of bulletproof glass with a few small, round holes for communication, sat Officer Kevin Rohr in a worn-out office chair that listed slightly to one side. His badge and name tag were pinned neatly to his uniform chest, a small concession to regulations in an environment that otherwise screamed of apathy. He was staring down at his cell phone, his thumbs scrolling rapidly, a faint, bluish light reflecting on his face. He was completely oblivious, or perhaps indifferent, to the person who had just entered. He looked bored, deeply dissatisfied, and more than a little irritated, as if his very presence here was an unjust punishment. Anya, as Lauren, approached the counter, stopping at a respectful distance. She waited. A full minute passed, the only sounds being the hum of the lights and the faint tapping of Cobb's thumbs on his phone screen. Then 2 minutes. He kept his eyes glued to the phone, occasionally letting out a sharp sniff or a frustrated sigh at whatever he was watching. Anya coughed, a deliberate but polite sound. There was no response. Finally, she spoke, making a conscious effort to keep her voice casual and non-confrontational. "Excuse me, officer." Cobb raised his head with a visible, reluctant effort, his small eyes narrowing as he peered at her through the thick glass. His gaze was a quick, dismissive scan, sweeping from the Longhorns cap pulled low over her face, to her simple t-shirt, down to her scuffed boots. It was an appraising look, a judgment, and one that did not hide his profound displeasure at being interrupted. "What?" he asked curtly. The single word was flat and unfriendly, not a question but a challenge. Anya chose to ignore his tone. She had to stay in character. "My name is Lauren," she began, keeping her voice soft. "I would like to get some information about the procedure for a temporary restraining order. I'm having some trouble with a neighbor in my apartment complex." Officer Cobb let out a long, loud, dramatic sigh, as if she had just asked him to perform an incredibly troublesome and burdensome task. He slammed his phone down on the counter with a loud thud that made her flinch. "A restraining order?" he repeated, his voice full of exasperation. "You have to go to the county courthouse for that, not here. We don't issue those. Got that?" He didn't even make eye contact, instead starting to fiddle with a stack of papers on his desk, already dismissing her. "Yes, I understand that the petition itself has to be filed with the court," Anya explained patiently, maintaining her respectful tone despite the rising irritation she felt. "But I've read online that a police report is usually required as evidence before you can file the petition. I would like to report the harassment and intimidation from my neighbor." This time, Cobb cut her off roughly, his voice now dripping with sarcasm and open contempt. "Harassment? Threats?" he mimicked in a high-pitched, mocking tone. "Let me guess, it's just some slumlord squabble. He plays his music too loud? His dog barks too much, right?" He sneered, finally looking directly at her, a cruel glint in his eye. "Look, little lady, we're here to deal with real crime. Robberies, break-ins, actual violence. We don't have the time or the manpower for your petty neighborly gossip. Go home and sort it out yourselves. Bake him some cookies or something." He waved his hand dismissively toward the door, a clear, insulting gesture of dismissal. Anya's carefully constructed patience was wearing thin. She could feel the blood rushing to her face, a hot flush of anger. But she took a slow, deep breath, reminding herself of the mission's purpose. She needed to see how far he would go. She needed the full picture. "Officer," she said, her voice still outwardly calm, but now with a new firmness, a clear edge of steel that she didn't try to hide. This is your job. I am a citizen of the city, and I am in need of police assistance. I have the right to report what I believe to be a violation of the law. I am requesting that a report be made, and I will also need your name and your badge number. Please. The request for his name and badge number was the final straw. For an officer with an attitude problem like Dale Cobb, a civilian, especially a civilian he had already categorized and despised, daring to ask for his personal information was not a request for accountability. It was a direct challenge to his authority, a threat to his fragile, resentful ego. It was the ultimate act of disrespect. He surged up from his chair, his massive frame seeming to fill the entire space behind the counter. He slammed his hand down on the wooden countertop with a loud, violent bang that startled everyone waiting in the lobby. What the hell do you want my name for? Ha! He roared, his face turning a deep Venus crimson. Veins popped out on his temples. So you can go somewhere and file some bogus complaint, right? I know people like you, always looking for trouble, always trying to start something with the police. His voice had become incredibly loud, full of raw menace, attracting the fearful attention of everyone in the hall. Some people began to whisper to each other, their eyes darting nervously between the enraged officer and the calm woman at the counter. Now get out of here before I call someone to drag you out for disturbing the public order. Do you hear me? But Anya Sharma was undeterred. In her career, she had faced down armed men in dark alleys and stared into the eyes of killers. A screaming, insecure desk sergeant was not going to make her back down. She stood up taller, looking directly into Cobb's glaring eyes through the bulletproof glass. I'm not going anywhere, she declared, her voice now ringing with a clear, unshakable firmness that showed not a single trace of fear. I will stand right here until I either exercise my civil right to report this incident, or until I speak directly to your shift supervisor. The direct challenge, the unyielding determination from a plainly dressed black woman he had completely written off, sent Officer Dale Cobb spiraling completely out of control. All restraint, every last shred of his professional code of conduct, evaporated in a flash of pure, unadulterated rage. His deep-seated racial prejudice, his bitter dissatisfaction with his job, his anger at feeling his authority challenged by someone he deemed inferior, all of it exploded into a single, inexcusable act of madness. His enraged eyes glanced down at his desk, where a half-full bottle of Dasani water sat. In a moment of blind fury, he snatched the bottle. You want to fight to the end? Fine. I'll show you, he shouted, his voice cracking with rage. Then, to the absolute horror and astonishment of Anya and everyone else present, Cobb fumbled with the lock on the side door of the counter and strode out into the main lobby. He marched straight up to Anya, his face twisted into a mask of pure fury. Without another word of warning, he uncapped the bottle and tipped it completely upside down, pouring the rest of the cold water directly over her head. The sound of splashing water, followed by shocked gasps from the onlookers, echoed through the lobby. And then, a dead, heavy silence fell over the West Division Police Station, a silence pregnant with the enormity of what had just happened. If you want to hang your hat here with us, go on and hit that subscribe button. We're building a real nice little community, and there's always room for one more at the table. In the moments immediately following the sudden, icy shock, Anya Sharma stood motionless in the middle of the waiting room. Cold water dripped from her head to her feet, soaking her clothes and forming that small, growing puddle on the floor beneath her. The silence in the room became so heavy, so profound, that you could almost hear your own heartbeat. The few people sitting and waiting were all gaping, their eyes wide with disbelief, their minds struggling to reconcile the scene they had just witnessed. A police officer, a uniform, an act of such petty, childish cruelty. The young rookie officer in the corner of the room was also frozen, his face pale and clammy, clearly horrified, but still not daring to move or speak. He had just witnessed a cardinal sin of policing, and his inaction made him a party to it. Officer Dale Cobb stood directly in front of Anya, the empty water bottle still clutched tightly in his hand. He was panting, his broad chest heaving, his face still flushed with the adrenaline of the anger he had just unleashed. A twisted, triumphant smirk lingered on his lips, but deep in his eyes, a flicker of confusion was starting to grow. Perhaps it was the woman's terrifying silence that unnerved him, or perhaps it was the vague, dawning awareness, a cold dread seeping into his consciousness, that he had just crossed a line of no return. Anya moved with a slow, deliberate grace that defied the chaotic scene. She raised one hand, brushing away the wet strands of hair and the water that was streaming down her face. Then she raised both hands, grasped the sodden brim of her longhorn's cap, and slowly, purposefully, removed it from her head. Her thick black hair, which had been tied back in a neat bun, was now loose and dripping wet, completely exposed. But more importantly, the removal of the cap revealed her entire face. An intelligent, angular face with keen, sharp eyes and a high forehead. In that single instant, the entire illusion she had so carefully crafted was shattered. The look of a slovenly, anonymous, unimportant commoner vanished. In its place was the unmistakable air of someone accustomed to giving orders, someone who wielded power with a natural ease. She looked straight into Dale Cobb's eyes, which were beginning to dilate with a vague but growing sense of unease. He could feel the shift in the room's power dynamic, even if he didn't yet understand it. "Officer Kevin Rohr," she began, and her voice was entirely different now. It was deeper, clearer, and held no trace of the softness or hesitation she had used before. It rang with a cold, sharp authority that echoed through the silent lobby, each word a hammer blow. "Badge number 714. Your actions just now," she said, her voice level but laced with ice. "Pouring a bottle of water over the head of a citizen who was seeking your help. First, refusing to take a legitimate report. Then, using derogatory and abusive language. And now, a physical assault." She paused, letting her words sink into the tense atmosphere, her eyes never leaving his face, watching as the first real seeds of fear began to take root there. Is this the standard of community service the Oak Haven Police Department operates under, officer? She let the question hang in the air for a long moment. "Perhaps I should introduce myself more fully," she continued, her voice still cold, but now tinged with a hint of sharp, cutting sarcasm. "My name is Anya Sharma. As of 1 week ago, I was sworn in as the Chief of Police of the Oak Haven City Police Department." She held his terrified gaze. "Your new boss." She then gestured to her own soaked clothes, a living testament to his failure. "I am making an unannounced visit to your station today, in disguise, so that I could personally and authentically assess the attitude and the quality of service of the officers on my front lines. And you, Officer Cobb," she concluded, her voice dropping slightly but losing none of its intensity, "have just given me a truly unforgettable performance. If a bomb had just exploded in the lobby, its effect probably wouldn't have been comparable to the impact of those words." Officer Dale Cobb's face went through a rapid, dramatic series of changes in a matter of seconds. First, there was utter, blank bewilderment. His brain simply refused to process the information. Then came disbelief. He stared at her, then down at her drenched, common clothes, his mind desperately trying to reconcile the image of the dripping woman before him with the stern, professional, uniformed portraits of the new chief of police he had only seen in internal bulletins and email announcements. Then, disbelief gave way to pure, undiluted horror as his brain finally, brutally, accepted the terrible truth. The angry red flush drained from his face, replaced by a deathly, waxy paleness, as if all the blood had just been vacuumed from his body. His jaw went slack. "Chief!" he stuttered, the word a choked, strangled sound, barely audible. "Sheriff, no, it can't be. You are really—" He took a clumsy step back, then another, staggering like a drunk man. The empty plastic water bottle finally fell from his nerveless fingers, rolling across the floor and making small, clanking noises in the heavy silence. And then the complete and total collapse happened. As the full, crushing realization of the career-ending disaster he had just single-handedly caused hit him, Cobb's legs seemed to give out. He threw his hands up in front of him, shaking his head in a frantic, panicked denial. "Oh my God! No, no, no!" His voice rose to a desperate, pleading whine. "I'm sorry, Chief. Chief Sharma. I am so sorry. I didn't know it was you. I swear to God. I really didn't know." He began to plead, his voice choked with a thick, desperate fear, tears starting to well up in his wide, terrified eyes. I was having a really bad day at work. So much pressure. I just lost control. I didn't mean to do that to you. Please believe me." He took another step forward and then, in a final, pathetic act of self-abasement, he practically crumpled to the floor right in front of her. His hands clasped together as if in prayer. He was on his knees, begging, Please forgive me. Please don't ruin my career. Don't fire me. I have a family to support. My wife is sick. 2 kids still in school. Please just give me another chance. It was just a stupid mistake. A moment of madness. I'll do anything you ask. Please." Dale Cobb's desperate, tearful pleas and his display of utter terror echoed throughout the lobby. His demeanor had undergone a complete 180-degree transformation, from that of an aggressive, abusive, and contemptuous bully to that of a pathetic coward begging for his future. It was a sight that was both pitiful and deeply despicable. But Anya Sharma showed no sign of being moved or relenting in the face of his tearful entreaty. She looked down at the officer, who was now almost prostrate at her feet, with a cold, dispassionate gaze. It was not a look of cruelty, but one of deep, profound disappointment and a steely, unshakable determination. She had seen enough late-stage, self-serving tears of repentance in her career to recognize them for what they were. "A stupid mistake, Officer Cobb?" she asked, her voice still cold but now heavy with the weight of her authority. "You call it a stupid mistake to intentionally and maliciously dump cold water on any citizen, whoever they are, simply because they dared to ask you to do your job properly? You call it a mistake to use derogatory, insulting language based on their appearance and, perhaps, their race." She shook her head slightly, a small but emphatic gesture of negation. "No, officer, this is not a one-time mistake. This is a manifestation, a symptom of a much larger and more dangerous problem that exists within the culture of this department. A problem of attitude, of prejudice, of a fundamental disrespect for the very people we are sworn to serve and protect. That is the problem I was appointed to address. And you," she said, her eyes boring into him, "just gave me the clearest, most undeniable example of it I could have ever asked for." She finally took her eyes off the groveling form of Dale Cobb. She turned her attention to the young officer who was still standing frozen in the corner, his face ashen with fear. "Officer!" Anya's voice was sharp, a commander's voice that tolerated no hesitation. "Get Sergeant Rickman out here at once. Tell him the chief is in the lobby and to come here immediately." The young officer jumped as if struck by lightning, nodded quickly, and almost ran into the back office area, eager to escape the charged atmosphere of the lobby. Less than a minute later, Sergeant Rickman, a middle-aged man with graying hair and a neat, professional uniform, hurried out into the lobby, his face a mask of confusion and concern at the urgent summons. But when he saw the scene before him, Chief Sharma, whom he had only met once at a command meeting, standing there in soaking wet civilian clothes, and his own subordinate, Officer Cobb, kneeling on the floor with a miserable, tear-streaked expression on his face, his confusion instantly morphed into pure shock and panic. "Chief," Rickman stammered, stepping closer. "Ma'am? What happened?" Anya looked straight at Sergeant Rickman, her eyes stern and commanding. "Sergeant Rickman," she said clearly, leaving no room for misunderstanding. "Officer Dale Cobb, badge number 714, is hereby suspended, effective immediately. You will relieve him of his weapon, his badge, and his radio. You will escort him to a private room and ensure he has no contact with anyone until a team from Internal Affairs arrives. Is that clear? Yes. Yes, ma'am, Rickman replied immediately, still in shock but his training kicking in. He shot a glance at Cobb, who was still kneeling on the floor, and his eyes held a mixture of anger and profound disappointment. And Sergeant, Anya added, her voice unwavering, I want you to begin an official report of this entire incident immediately. You will take the statements of all civilian witnesses present. And she emphasized the word, making its significance crystal clear, will be giving my testimony as the victim in this incident. Yes, Chief. Immediately, Rickman said, then turned to the still collapsed form of his officer. Cobb, get up. You're coming with me. He and the young rookie officer helped the limp, defeated Dale Cobb to his feet and led him into the back area, leaving Chief Anya Sharma standing alone in the middle of the waiting room, her clothes still damp, but her expression as solid and determined as granite. The Internal Affairs investigation was conducted with a speed and priority that was unprecedented in the Oak Haven Police Department, operating under the direct and watchful eye of Chief Sharma's office. A senior investigative team, led by a notoriously thorough lieutenant, was at the West Division Station within the hour. They conducted their work with methodical and unimpeachable professionalism. First, they took a detailed and formal statement from Chief Sharma herself. She recounted the entire incident with objective, clinical precision, from the moment she entered the station as Lauren to the final, humiliating act. She detailed Cobb's initial dismissiveness, his refusal of service, his insulting and derogatory language, the climactic water-pouring incident, and the subsequent reveal of her identity. Her statement was recorded and carefully transcribed, a foundational document for the case. Next, they interrogated a now sequestered Officer Cobb. By this time, some of the initial panic had subsided, replaced by a sullen, terrified resignation. Faced with the notoriously tough IA investigators, he no longer attempted to be evasive or to blame it all on a bad day. He admitted to refusing to help the woman he thought was Lauren. He admitted to using inappropriate language. And finally, he admitted to pouring the water on her in a fit of rage. However, he repeatedly tried to frame his actions through the lens of self-pity, emphasizing his work stress, his ignorance of her true identity, and pathetically begging for leniency for the sake of his family. The IA investigators also took formal, sworn statements from Sergeant Rickman, the young rookie officer who had witnessed the latter part of the incident, and from the 3 civilians who had courageously remained in the lobby after being assured that their statements would be protected and that they would face no repercussions. All of their testimonies perfectly matched Chief Sharma's account of Cobb's aggressive, unprofessional, and abusive behavior. But the most damning piece of evidence was entirely objective. The security cameras in the lobby, though old, had recorded the entire incident in clear, undeniable detail. The video file was ironclad. It clearly showed Cobb's initial indifference to Anya's arrival. It captured the increasingly tense conversation at the counter, and it provided a horrifying, wide-angle shot of his actions as he stormed out from behind the counter, marched up to her, and deliberately poured the bottle of water over her head. The video was irrefutable evidence that dismantled any possible defense Cobb could have mounted. IA investigators also dug deep into Officer Cobb's personnel file and his full disciplinary history. They unearthed a troubling pattern. A series of written complaints from citizens stretching back over the past 5 years, all describing remarkably similar behavior: rudeness, disrespect, and discriminatory language, especially targeted toward women and minorities. Most of these complaints, they discovered, had ended with Cobb receiving only a verbal warning or a recommendation for counseling from his previous supervisors. Several were dismissed entirely due to a lack of evidence, or because there were no witnesses. The record painted a clear and disturbing picture of an officer with persistent and dangerous attitude problems that had been tolerated, ignored, and effectively enabled by the system for years, allowing them to fester until they resulted in this catastrophic incident. with the incontrovertible evidence from the security cameras, the testimony from the victim who happened to be the chief of police as well as multiple witnesses, and a documented history of previous complaints, the conclusion of the internal affairs investigation was swift and severe. Officer Dale Cobb was found to have seriously violated a long series of Oakhaven PD codes of ethics and regulations, including dereliction of duty, disrespect and contempt for citizens, use of inappropriate and abusive language, abuse of power, and assault. The matter was brought before the SPD's disciplinary board. Under intense scrutiny and with a clear message from Chief Sharma that she wanted a response that was not just punitive but also constructive, the board made a decision that was considered groundbreaking and unprecedented in the department's history. They chose not to fire Cobb outright, which would have been entirely justified and expected. Instead, they imposed a novel disciplinary measure that combined severe punishment with a potential, though difficult, opportunity for correction. They called it the Accountability and Restoration Initiative. The first component was a 1-year, 12-month suspension without pay. This was an extremely severe financial penalty designed to directly impact Cobb's life and family, a heavy blow to his career and a clear message about the financial consequences of misconduct. The second and more radical component was his mandatory participation in a special 2-year probationary intervention program. This program, designed specifically for serious cases of attitude and prejudice violations like Cobb's, included a series of strict, closely monitored requirements. He would be required to participate in intensive and mandatory training in anger management, de-escalation techniques, professional ethics, civil rights law, and anti-racism and implicit bias training. He would have to attend mandatory weekly individual psychotherapy sessions with a designated department psychologist to address the root causes of his attitudes, biases, and his lack of emotional control. He was ordered to perform a minimum of 200 hours of supervised community service at nonprofit organizations that served the racially and culturally diverse communities he had shown a bias against. Throughout this 2-year period, he would be subject to periodic assessment tests every 3 months on his knowledge, attitudes, and behavior, conducted by an independent monitoring panel. This panel consisted of representatives from Internal Affairs, the training department, his psychologist, and, crucially, a representative from a community oversight committee. The conditions were absolute. Cobb had to successfully complete and demonstrate genuine, lasting changes in his attitude and behavior during the 2-year program to even be considered for reemployment. If he was permitted to return, he would be placed under a special, heightened level of supervision for at least 1 additional year. Any violation during the program, or if the supervisory board concluded that he had not demonstrated genuine and substantial improvement, would result in immediate, permanent dismissal with no opportunity for appeal. The disciplinary decision was announced internally and was also summarized in a press release from Chief Sharma's office, a move intended to demonstrate her commitment to transparency and reform. This was his last chance, and the entire department and the city would be watching. The incident involving Officer Cobb and Chief Sharma's firm, unconventional handling of it sent powerful shock waves through the entire Sterling Police Department. It was like a large stone had been thrown into a stagnant pond, sending ripples out to every corner of the organization. The message couldn't have been clearer. The era of covering up for fellow officers, of tolerating misconduct, of authoritarian attitudes, and of bigotry was officially over under the new chief. Anya Sharma skillfully used the incident, though she never mentioned Cobb by name in subsequent public statements or department-wide meetings, as a powerful case study in her command meetings and in the new, mandatory retraining sessions she implemented for the entire force. She emphasized her new, non-negotiable expectations for professional service, for absolute respect for all citizens regardless of their appearance or circumstance, and she laid out the inevitable and severe consequences that would follow any discovery of abuse of power or discrimination. Naturally, the reaction within the SPD was sharply divided. The good officers, those who genuinely wanted to work in a professional environment and were committed to rebuilding trust with the community, were energized and strongly supported Sharma's approach. They saw that, at last, there was a leader who was willing to take decisive, painful action to remove the bad apples that tarnished the reputation of everyone who wore the badge. They felt seen and validated. However, a significant number of officers, especially those of the older generation or those who held similar resentful attitudes to Cobb, felt fearful, dissatisfied, and secretly hostile. They grumbled in squad cars and locker rooms that the new chief was too strict, that she wasn't protecting her own, and that her method of using a disguise was untrustworthy, a dirty trick. They felt they were now under suspicion, that their every move would be scrutinized. A culture of fear began to creep in alongside the new culture of accountability. Anya knew that the road to genuine, lasting reform would be long and thorny, filled with resistance, but she was undeterred. This was exactly the kind of resistance she had expected. For her part, Chief Anya Sharma continued to make other undercover visits to various stations and units, though with reduced frequency as her message began to sink in. She focused more of her energy on developing new policies, improving training procedures, increasing direct dialogue with community leaders, and relentlessly promoting a culture of accountability from the top down. Her initial dramatic actions with Cobb, while controversial among some of her own officers, had built an initial foundation of credibility and a cautious but real trust from the public and from activist groups. They saw that she was not just a politician spouting empty rhetoric about reform. She was a leader who took action. As for Officer Dale Cobb, he began the Accountability and Restoration Initiative in a haze of shame, humiliation, anger, and a deep, simmering resentment toward the woman who had put him in this position. The 2 years ahead of him were a daunting gauntlet of harsh challenges, requiring him to confront prejudices and bad habits that had been ingrained in his subconscious for decades. He was forced to sit in therapy sessions and talk about his feelings of inadequacy and his anger at a world he felt had left him behind. He attended bias training where he was confronted with the historical context of policing and minority communities. His first day of community service was at a community center in a predominantly Latino neighborhood. He was tasked with cleaning floors and stocking food pantry shelves, working alongside the very people he had once looked down upon. The interactions were awkward and filled with a palpable tension. Whether he could truly change, whether he could successfully navigate the program or would ultimately be permanently fired, remained an open question. But he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this was his absolute last chance. He had no choice but to try to comply, or he would lose everything he had ever known. This story is more than just a simple anecdote about a bad officer getting caught red-handed. It serves as a powerful and sobering reminder of the dangers of implicit bias and the abuse of power that can exist and even thrive in an environment of lax oversight and institutional tolerance. It shows how such behavior directly harms the dignity and the rights of citizens and, in doing so, erodes public confidence in the entire law enforcement system. At the same time, the story is also a testament to the profound importance of leadership of leaders who dare to think differently, who dare to act boldly, who are willing to face uncomfortable truths head-on, and who do not hesitate to apply strict and fair disciplinary measures to create real, meaningful change. Chief Sharma's use of a disguise, while methodologically controversial, clearly became a powerful and effective tool to expose a hidden reality and to force an entire system to look itself in the mirror, to stare directly into the dark corners and confront the problems that existed within itself. Ultimately, the story also raises a larger, more complex question about human resilience, about the nature of second chances, and about the very limits of change. Can someone with deeply entrenched biases and attitudes like Dale Cobb truly be reformed through forced intervention, therapy, and education? Or is it a futile attempt to reshape something that has long since hardened? The answer is not simple, but the very act of trying to create a pathway for change, as difficult and uncertain as it may be, represents a more hopeful approach than simply punishing and eliminating without ever attempting to address the root of the problem. So, what do you think? Was Chief Sharma's decision to go undercover to test the behavior of her own subordinates a necessary and effective method? A stroke of genius to get at the unvarnished truth? Or was it an untrustworthy and inappropriate tactic for a leader? And what about Officer Cobb's punishment? Was the 1-year suspension and the 2-year intensive probation program too harsh, too lenient, or a reasonable and creative solution to a complex problem? We would love to hear your thoughts, your feelings, and your diverse perspectives on this dramatic story. We want to hear what Texas thinks. Drop your opinions in the comments below. This story cuts deeper than just one bad cop having a bad day. It's a raw, unfiltered look at a fundamental truth about human nature. A uniform, a title, or a position of authority doesn't build character. It only reveals what's already there. The true measure of a person isn't how they treat their boss or someone they want to impress. It's how they treat the person they believe has no power, no voice, and no consequence. Officer Cobb wasn't a good man who made one mistake. He was a bully who wore a mask of civility until his authority was challenged by someone he deemed inferior. His desperate, tearful apology wasn't for the act of humiliation itself, it was for the catastrophic miscalculation of getting caught by the wrong person. The real lesson here is a gut punch. Power doesn't corrupt, it simply pulls the curtain back, forcing us to see the person for who they truly are when they think no one is watching. It's a chilling reminder that the most dangerous prejudices are the ones that smile in your face while waiting for the chance to strike. Now that you've seen the whole story unfold in Oakhaven, we have to ask the hard questions that go beyond just this one incident. Was Chief Sharma's undercover sting a necessary evil to expose a deeply broken system? Or was it an unethical trap that undermines trust within the police force itself? And what about the punishment for Officer Cobb? Is this innovative last chance program a genuine path to reform for someone with such ingrained prejudice? Or is it a waste of time and resources? What does true justice and real accountability look like in a situation this messy? We want to hear your unfiltered perspective in the comments. Like the video if it made you think, subscribe for more deep dives into complex stories, and share this to start a conversation.